Hi there, my name is Mark Lieber. I'm with Atlanta 3-Gun, A3G, and today we're in the A3G Reloading Laboratory talking about roll sizing. Why do we do it? What tools do we have that we can do it with? Behind me I have 3 roll sizers. I have 2 Casepro100s, one manual, one is motorized, and then I have a roll sizer from Rollsizer.com out of Australia, which is also motorized. So let's start right in and talk about why we roll size. We've all picked up brass on the range. Don't know who shot it, don't know what it was shot out of, but we picked it up on the range, we brought it home, we cleaned it up, and we want to turn it into a live round of ammunition. So what do? We throw it in our press, we pull the handle, and we find some of the cases are really hard to resize. We're really having to pull on that handle to get the brass to resize. What that's because of is the case down here. The case gets more expanded with high pressure rounds. Older brass, high pressure rounds, all of those things contribute to just how big this gets. A loose chamber, that's probably one of the most familiar ones out there. Makes this, basically you get a piece of brass that is too big down here. Well, when you put it in your sizing die, everybody's using a shell holder of some sort in their press. So you got a shell holder that's holding the rim of the cartridge, and you got a sizing die coming down the walls of the piece of brass, but you can never get all the way down. Okay, you just can't. It's physically impossible to hold it in a shell plate and get all the way down the piece of brass. So what you end up getting with the finished product is, we've loaded this, we've put a bullet in it, we've got powder and a primer in it. We drop it in our case gauge to do our homework, and look, we see that it sits too proud. I can't use that in a match. That's now a piece of ammo that I can't use in a match because it may not feed in my gun, and I don't want to be that guy in the middle of a stage that has a malfunction because the brass didn't feed and my chamber didn't close. So that's what roll sizing does. It basically takes this piece of brass, runs it between 2 pieces of metal called mandrels or dies, and it gets the bulge out of the base of the case. We still put it in the sizing die. We still do this normal reloading process to decap it or deprime it. But what we have is a much more consistent set of brass that takes a much more even pressure to size in the sizing die on our press. That's also important because the vibrations created by the sizing process and the motion of the press are designed by the press manufacturer to dispense powder more consistently. So for instance, if I have a Dillon 1050 and this piece of brass is oversized and it takes a lot of force to get it sized, I'm going to have a lot more vibration in my powder measure, and what's going to happen is the powder is going to settle a little bit more, and the charge going into the case that's under the powder measure could be as much as 0.3 of a grain higher, depending on my powder, than what I'm after. Again, there's an inconsistency that's introduced into my reloading process, which is going to affect me at a match if I'm loading match ammo. So that's why roll sizing is so important if you're making match ammo, or certainly if you're a commercial outfit, a small to medium-sized commercial outfit loading for competitive shooters. The ammo's got to be consistent. You want to make sure they're making power factor consistently, and you want to make sure the point of impact of that bullet is pretty consistent downrange. So that's why roll sizing is important. Let's talk about what machines we have available today to do the job for us. What we have here is, again, 3 roll sizers. Down on the far end, I have the Casepro100 that I've had for many years. It's a great machine. It's manually operated. None of these came with the case feeder. That's an option. They're all Dillon case feeders. They're all the exact same. So speed-wise, they're all going to feed brass at the same rate. The far machine is set up for 223 just because that's what I used it with last. These 2 are set up for 9mm because we're going to do a comparison between the 2. Anyway, so Casepro100, great machine. Up until the release of this machine, the Rollsizer from Whitehead Specialty Engineering in Australia, these were the cat's meow. Unless you were a professional reloader and spent 15 grand on a specialized machine, these were the machine you had in your basement or in your garage. We're going to focus for a minute on this machine, and then we'll come back to the Casepros. And the reason we're going to do that is this is brand new. This is the only machine in the United States. I've had it for 2 weeks. We're the first ones to get it. We're honored to be partnered with Whitehead Specialty Engineering out of Australia. It's going from here to SHOT Show. It processes the heck out of brass. I'm going to show you how it does it. So let's zoom in a little bit here on the machine, and forgive my amateur camera work. I am not a cameraman. What we have is we have the outer ring, which always stays the same. You never change this. The inner piece is your die that's caliber specific. You'll see somewhere on here there's a 9 stamped on this. And so caliber conversion is simple. You undo the center nut, pop this off, put a new one on, use this hex head screw to adjust your height of your drop tube, and that's it, folks. It takes less than 5 minutes to change calibers on this thing. It's awesome. So the way it works, the way it feeds brass, is you see these 6 pins that look a lot like Allen head screws, which they pretty much are. They hit this lever, which feeds a piece of brass. The brass engages the mandrel and comes out this end. So with 6 pins, I'll tell you ahead of time, it's going to way outrun this case feeder. So I'm going to run it for a minute. I'm going to give you a little higher view here because you'll see the drop tube. When the drop tube is empty, I'm going to stop the machine, and we'll talk about how we put them more in unison. Alright guys, I just ran out of brass in my drop tube, so it was, I don't know how many seconds it was, but it was quick. So you can see that the machine outruns the case feeder, and that's the biggest issue with this setup. And unfortunately, it's not at all an issue with the machine, it's an issue with feeding the machine. And traditionally, with the Casepro100 and the other alternatives in the marketplace, that hasn't been an issue because we haven't had a machine that will process brass as fast as this one. So Kevin at Whitehead Specialty Engineering is working on it. So the way we're going to change this machine so that it keeps up more appropriately with the case feeder is we're going to take, you see there's 6 pins in here, we're going to take 3 of them out. So we're essentially cutting the speed of the machine in half. And by doing so, like I said, I've had this for 2 weeks, I've been playing with it. By doing that, we are going to make the speed much more appropriate for the case feeder, and the case feeder will be able to keep up with the roll sizing machine. Now, a lot of you are saying, what do I care? I mean, it's a machine, I just turn it on and I walk away and life is good. Well, you're right to a point, but if you've got any OCD in you at all, you're going to want things to work together. So let me do this. Actually, what I'm going to do is I'm going to let the case feeder fill the tube because the tube is still empty. And once the tube is full, I'll turn the machine back on. You will see that the output is not necessarily a consistent rhythmic output. That's because where the mandrel grabs the brass depends on how oversized the brass is. If you've got a piece of brass within spec, it was shot out of it was a low power round shot out of a gun with a tight chamber, the mandrel's not going to pick it up till the backside. If it's a big old fat piece of brass that was shot out of a sloppy chamber with a high pressure round, it's going to be picked up sooner. So where the mandrel grabs it, it is dependent upon how oversized that piece of brass is. So don't worry about the sound of the output and the brass dropping in the bucket. Understand that it's all feeding as fast as it can go through the machine. So here we go. Okay, so you can see that was much more, the speed of the case feeder was much more in sync with the speed of the machine. and that's basically half speed of the machine. Machine will do between 6,000 and 7,000 cases per hour. The case feeder is going to do between 2,000 and 2,500 cases per hour. One of the things I really like about the Rollsizer.com unit is it's simple. It's very simple. You don't have to be an engineer to operate it, to use it, to figure out why it's not working right. It just works. I have processed a ton of brass with it, and it just plain works. Most of the tools we use take some level of technical savvy. Dillon Press, the Casepro100, they all take some level of, gee, why did that happen, and figuring out how to keep it from happening. This machine is so simple, it makes life so much easier. It's what a brass rolling machine should be, simple. The only surfaces that are metal on metal are bearing driven. They're inside the machine. They are not serviceable. You don't have to oil them. You don't have to grease them. Big plus. Big plus. So the brass gets squeezed between two pieces of metal. Brass is a soft metal. You don't have to lubricate that. Everything else works pretty seamlessly. I am very comfortable that I can fill this brass hopper, this case feeder. I can go do something else for 15 or 20 minutes, and it's going to run. It's not going to give me any trouble. So that is the Rollsizer from Whitehead Specialty Engineering. It's an awesome machine. It's the fastest machine out there. It's all the machine you'll need. Again, the only limiting factor is we don't have a case feeder that can keep up with it. The day we do, it's going to be great. So this machine is a great machine. For those of you who have pinged me online and said, hey, what do you think of the machine? I think it's awesome. Honestly, I've been reloading for 30 years, 35, 40, I don't know, a long darn time. And this is one of the best machines I've seen. It's one of the biggest game changers I've seen for those of you trying to produce a consistent product. If you're a competitive shooter and you don't want to be the guy who's in the middle of a stage and has a malfunction because you got a piece of brass stuck in your gun, that's when you need one of these. So let's take a quick look, for comparison's sake, at the Casepro. Again, Casepro is a great machine. It's been around for a long time, and it was the de facto standard for a while, until this one came out. I'm going to run this for you for a minute. You can see how it works. Pretty simple. So one of the things that I said earlier, a couple of things I said earlier about the Rollsizer.com unit were that one is I can fill it with brass and walk away and it'll do its thing without any issues. The other is it's very low maintenance. You don't have to oil it. There's not a whole lot of bearing surfaces you have to worry about. And the other thing I mentioned is that caliber conversion is simple on that machine. It's less than 5 minutes. Unfortunately, the Casepro doesn't share those three qualities. The way the Casepro100 is designed, it's got metal bearing surfaces. It's got a lot of surface area of metal on metal. So you've got the sliding bar, which rides on two metal rails, and they've got to stay lubricated. You've got three bearings down the side to keep everything lined up. So lubrication is very, very important on this machine. Every 2 or 3 5-gallon buckets of brass, I will stop everything. I'll get a Q-tip. I'll put some white lithium grease, which is what I prefer to use. Put white lithium grease on all the bearing surfaces and on the rollers. And then every 2,000 rounds or so, whenever I see that it's getting dry, I will put some of the True Blue gun lubricant that we use at Atlanta 3 gun. It works great on the Rollsizer as well. It's a thin, clear, light viscosity gun oil, and I'll put a couple of drops on the front and a couple of drops on the back while the machine is working so that things don't get bound up or dry. Now the trick there is you don't want to get oil on your die faces. So if you get oil on the die faces or on the brass and it transfers from the brass to the die face, then instead of rolling through, your brass is going to simply push through and you're going to have an issue there. Not to mention you're going to be forced to clean all your brass again if oil gets in there. So you got to be a little careful with the oil. That's number one. Number two is I can't set this and forget it. You can't really just fill this up and walk off. It's not really designed for that. You've got to be engaged. You got to watch the thing working. because if you get a 380 in here, chances are your nylon screws, which act as your clutch back here, will shear off. That's what they're designed for. The way this flywheel is designed from Mike is that there's 2 nylon screws holding it all together. This nut is hand tight, and if there's any kind of hang up here, metal on metal, or something that feels like metal on metal to the machine, these nylon screws will shear off. That saves any of the more expensive components from any kind of damage, which it works great. It's designed to be that way. It just means you can't go very far when the machine is running. And to that point, I mean, 380 brass is probably the biggest Achilles heel for me, because I get it mixed in my 9mm quite a bit. As evidence, this little pile of nylon screws that are all sheared off was the number of nylon screws I had to use for 2 5-gallon buckets of 9mm brass, and I had that much 380 mixed in. So it happens. It's a consequence. 380 on that machine simply goes right through, and I find it in my press when that's normally when I find it anyway. So again, that's sort of issue number 2 with this machine, is that it has protection built in so that it won't kill itself, and to put it back in working order, it takes a little bit of time. Just time. The nylon screws are cheap. I buy them by the 300 bag, so they're very, very cheap, but again, it's a time thing. The last piece, and probably one of the most significant pieces, is to change calibers on the Casepro is a much more in-depth process. Essentially, this piece gets unbolted, the front of the slider bar gets unbolted, and you put the correct dies in. You change out your slider in most cases, or flip it around, change out your bushing, and it's rather involved. So, and then you've got adjustments. Some of these adjustments will change for each caliber, so you've got to readjust the machine for the caliber. Again, not a big deal, but it's just time consuming. So it's gonna cost you time and brass processing at the end of the day. So those are sort of the primary issues. Casepro versus Rollsizer.com. Still a good product. The problem, guys, is the price point on this is larger. It's more expensive than the price point on Kevin's device. So I know it's not a price-driven market. If all else is equal, it is a price-driven market, right? If I can get apples to apples, I'm going to buy the cheapest apples I can get. With the case of the Rollsizer from Whitehead Specialty Engineering, it's less expensive, and it's not an Apple. It's already, it's way beyond that. So I'm real excited about it. The manual one over here, for those of you who are doing, if you're doing between 500 and 1,500 rounds a month, this may be fine for you. But if you're doing much more than that, guys, you really need to look at something motorized. All right, I think we can wrap this up. We've talked about the virtues of roll sizing. We've talked about these 3 machines and how they can help you with your roll sizing needs. Let's real quickly talk about checking our work. So you saw this earlier. It's a case gauge. Take your brass, should drop right in, and it should drop right out. Okay, that means that piece of brass is sized correctly, and it's not going to give you trouble. You can either do this before you load the brass, or you can do it after you've loaded the round. I typically do it after I've loaded the round, just to make sure that there's nothing else that was introduced during the loading process that's going to make my brass out of spec. You can get single case gauges, you can get quads, or you can get them in 50 or 100 round bricks. Best place to get those, folks, is cpwsa.com. You can get them several places, I'm sure, but I use the folks at cpwsa.com. They're big supporters of the shooting sports. Prices are great, and shipping is ridiculously fast. So cpwsa.com for your needs like that. Check them out. They're online. The other thing, for those of you who think, geez, I would love to have roll size brass, but I don't have the money right now because it's Christmas and I've spent all my money, or I just don't have the volume to buy a Rollsizer. Check out the Brass Exchange. BrassExchange.com, good folks, they're local as well. They will sell you pre-processed brass that won't give you any trouble. So check them out, use their product, even if it's just for the match ammo. Get yourself some good brass, start from a good point, and you'll do well in matches. You don't want to, like I said, you don't want to be that guy in the middle of a stage that has a malfunction. So I'm sure for the last 10 or 15 minutes you guys have been thinking, what do these cost? If you haven't already been online surfing, looking at Casepro and Rollsizer.com. Casepro100 manually operated, $1,162 as you see it there with the case feeder. Okay, Dillon case feeder. The motorized unit, $2,225, again, as you see it there. And the Rollsizer.com unit, $1,750, as you see it here. Yeah, it's $500 cheaper than the Casepro100. In my opinion, it's more robust, less maintenance, easier to use, and it certainly is faster. So that's my choice. But you guys, you've got the knowledge you need to make an informed decision. One thing to note on anything Casepro related, it's going to be a 2 to 3 month backlog. So if you order it today, you'll see it in 2 to 3 months. The Rollsizer.com unit, we get our next shipment in February. There is a waiting list. If you're on the list, you're good. We still have room on the list for February deliveries. If you want to get on that list, you need to contact me as soon as possible, mark@atlanta3gun.com. We're the only dealer for these in the United States today. If you have any other questions, comments, shoot me a note. And listen, thanks for spending the last 20 minutes of your day with me. I hope I answered all your questions. I hope it was informative. And I'll see you on the range.